Alright, good evening everyone. Trying something new, don't know how well it's going to work. It's called Snagit to do the video. And the next thing I'm going to try is how to get the picture in the picture. So, one step at a time, keep everybody happy. Tried doing this in class today and it didn't quite work out with the way I did it last week because YouTube kept crashing. So we'll see how that goes and we'll keep it short. So, this is chapter 5. Biological roots of criminal behavior. So, okay, well, let me change my slide. Hold on, here we go. There we go. Excuse me, just learning it. So, our major principles of biological theories. Number one is that the brain is where your personality is located. And that biological theories believe that human behavior is based upon how your body's made up. Your constitutionality is what that's called, and your genetics. Suggested that if we see differences based upon gender and race, they may be biologically based. People can inherit determinants of behavior, conduct rooted in instinct. Biological roots of human conduct really are not quite visible today. So you can't, even if the biological roots exist, it's hard to look at a person and see that they exist. Some suggest that biological roots result from things that we've learned from earlier stages in our developmental lives. But they do acknowledge that there is an interplay between heredity, biology, and social environment. We have to consider that. It's not just about biology and heredity. The social environment does have an impact. So there's a lot of concepts, a lot of things that have happened over the years with regard to biology. We discussed positivism last week. Positivism being when we first tried to apply scientific techniques to the study of crime, based upon principles of evolution. People move on and develop, society develops, and they thought that criminals were people who did not fully develop, that their lines did not evolve and therefore they were criminals. During the 1880s to 1930s, some of the concepts were phrenology, atavism, the concept of born criminals, and criminaloids. Charles Darwin wrote about people, and he wrote about evolution, and one of his concepts was that aggression favors the strongest and best animals. You may have heard the term or the phrase, only the strong survive. Well, that's kind of drawn from Darwin, suggesting that aggression favors the strongest and best animals in the reproductive process. And of course, if they're the strongest and best, then they win the battles, and their line goes on, and we'll hear about that from another perspective later on. Lorenz, in his book On Aggression, 1966, said aggression serves other purposes, but does take on some covert forms, like people's drive for wealth and power, and also said that human behavior was an adaptation of our basic instincts. One of the studies was criminal anthropology, a scientific study of the relationship between human physical characteristics and criminality, so suggesting that how someone's made up physically contributes to criminality, and we'll see a couple of theorists came up with ideas based upon body types. Physiognomy is basically suggesting that you can read personality characteristics from facial features. Notice that science in this definition is in quotes because it wasn't really a science. Phrenology, very interesting. It's probably one of my favorites. I should have bought it, but in Urban Outfitters a few years ago, I think it was in Florida, I saw a bust. And there's pictures, very similar pictures on the internet you can look up if you look up Criminality images. But basically, it's head and shoulders where the skull has a map on it. And on that map are different behaviors because they believed that the different types of behaviors were based upon different areas of the brain. And the other neat thing is they thought that you could actually feel the skull for bumps, and that would indicate the more active parts of the brain. And you could figure out what person's behavior would be based upon the bumps on their head. Franz Joseph Gall is responsible for this wonderful theory. Positivist School we talked about last week again. Two principles, social determinism and scientific techniques. Rooted in the work of Auguste Comte, suggested that reality consists of a world of objectively defined facts that can be scientifically measured and ultimately controlled. So, they believe that everything could be measured, we could figure things out based upon existing biology, that there were no other influences. Lombroso, he suggested the theory of atavism or concept, where suggesting that people had primitive urges that did not get kind of weaned out during evolution. And atavistic individuals are basically throwbacks to more primitive biological state. Think of, let's say, the caveman, who could go out and grab whatever woman he wants and drag her down by the hair. That a criminal is kind of like that, just go out, and he's got an urge, you just go and do it. Where the name criminaloids meant people who were pulled in to law-breaking activity by environmental influences. Things are going on around them. Lombroso also studied females, basically suggesting that female offenders, again, had atavistic foundations, and he had the masculinity hypothesis that said that criminal women exhibited masculine features or mannerisms. So turn that around, and he would believe that if you saw a female who looked more male, that she was more likely to be a criminal. Evaluations of it. Goring looked at atavism, studied it, and he saw a degree of correlation between physiological features in criminal history, and he suggested atavism doctrine was sound. Now, remember what we talked about correlations before. Whether you see a correlation, does it actually mean that there's a cause there? And that's probably where the problem with Goring is, that he looked at the correlation and thought, hey, you know what? There's a correlation there, it's probably a good thing. Houghton, they also saw physical differences between offenders and non-offenders, felt that criminals were physiologically inferior, and also that because they were inferior, and that's the way they came, that's the way they're built, that it would be ineffective to try to rehabilitate them, that the best way to deal with them would be to banish them from society. And this is very similar to the concept of eugenics that existed during the 20s and the 30s, same time when Houghton was doing his work. Constitutional theories, and here's where we got a closer look at body typing, those types of things. Crime relates to offenders' body types. What did they inherit from their ancestors genetically? And they also believe that you could see features that may be suggestive of their criminal type. This was the 30s and 40s, and also more recently 60s to the present. The concepts, as you can see, somatotyping, mesomorph, ectomorph, endomorph, the XYY chromosome, so the extra Y, I like to say the extra Y chromosome, and that person they would call the supermale. Twin studies, behavioral genetics, and heritability. So body types theories, suggesting that how your body's built, whether you're thin and frail, whether you're muscular, whether you're fat, doughboy kind of a thing, that would be indicative of the type of behavior that you would have. And you see Kretschmer, he had 3 types. The cycloid was the heavy-set, soft body person who might commit nonviolent property crimes. The schizoid, it was the athletic, muscular body that would be more likely to commit violent crimes. And the dysplastics were emotional and out of control that might commit sexual offenses or crimes of passion. Sheldon, who you might hear this name on the final, because there's a question about which person is not part of the Chicago School. Chicago School is a sociological school with regard to criminology, and Sheldon is not one of those. He's a constitutionalist. Sheldon believed that, again, body types. You see, Sheldon had four body types. And the endomorph, being the soft, round, overweight, and sociable. Mesomorph, athletic, muscular, most likely to be associated with delinquency or crime. Ectomorph, thin, fragile, and shy, and inhibited. And then your balanced, average built person. Sheldon and Gleck, Sheldon and Eleanor Gleck, this is a couple. Sheldon's the first name in this case. They looked back at William Sheldon's material, and they supported that there was a link between the mesomorphs and delinquency. And saying delinquency means they both studied. Both William Sheldon and Eleanor Gleck studied juveniles. All right, body chemistry, another biological theory, and there's a lot packed into here. Body chemistry suggested that chemical influences and weather could explain your criminal behavior, 40s to the present. Weather, we've talked about weather before. If it's freezing cold in the dead of winter, you don't have much crime. Hot summertime, people get aggravated because of the temperature. Maybe, they're more agitated, more likely. Also concepts like hypoglycemia, amount of sugar that you have in your body, vitamins, food allergies, serotonin, PMS, and MAOA. So hypoglycemia, or low blood sugar, there is research to suggest that excess sugar, which would actually be called hyperglycemia, could lead to hyperactivity and aggressiveness. There's actually a case from many years ago in which a gentleman claimed a Twinkie defense, claimed that because he ate Twinkies that had so much sugar in them caused him to be violent. Look that one up. There is some evidence out there, but it's really unclear that there's a link between sugar and behavior. But PET scans, which would be a brain scan, found that there were lower glucose levels or sugar levels in the prefrontal cortex of murderers, suggesting that the low blood sugar in their brains might be indicative of causing their criminal behavior. Food allergies, there is some research and suggestion that certain types of food allergies could affect the brain, allergic reactions affect the brain, reduce learning in childhood, contribute to delinquency and later adult crime. Certain food additives may be linked to violence. Caffeine and sugar may trigger antisocial behavior. So here comes all the cop jokes, right? Too much coffee and too many donuts. Is that why some cops are antisocial? No, I ain't going there. There's really not enough evidence to support that claim either. Or I would be a really nasty guy because I drink enough coffee in the daytime. Maybe I'm not having enough sugar. Vitamins and other nutrients may also have an impact. Hormones in criminality. We've probably heard, of roid rage, somebody too much testosterone, taking extra testosterone to help them, build their muscles, and then having an anger issue and, killing somebody or beating somebody. There is some studies that suggest a relationship between high blood levels of testosterone to increased male aggressiveness. But this may also be combined with low brain levels of serotonin, which is something in your body that actually tends to make you more calm. And there's also suggestion that changes in testosterone levels in women may also be linked to personality changes. So, say a female with higher testosterone is more likely to be aggressive. Also, female hormone fluctuations, suggestion linked to crime. There's a drop in serotonin before menstruation that might be linked to PMS. And there's evidence linking PMS to violent or criminal behavior, but it's far, far from clear. So, there's no suggestion that every woman who goes through that time during the month is going to be violent, not committing violent crimes. Weather. Well, we talked about weather already. Temperature, said to be the only weather variable that's consistently related to crime. And I think all of us can identify this. As the temperature goes up to a certain point, as you can see from the chart here, temperature goes up to a certain point, assaults and violent crimes go up. In this case, it suggests that at 75 degrees is when it peaks. And if it gets hotter than that, the aggressiveness starts to go down. But it doesn't go completely down. Even at 99 plus degrees, people are still more violent than they are at, say, 35 degrees. But they're somewhat equal, actually equal at 35 degrees and 99 degrees. Between those two, it goes up in either way. So, criminal families. There have been a lot of studies into families. The two that stand out usually are the Juke family and the Kallikak family. Jukes, basically a whole group of people that they followed through. And we'll look at more, when we look into your textbook, we'll talk about it more in class, the details of these families, rather than get into it here. And then the Kallikak family is a comparison between people of, say, one father who had two different female liaisons, and the one group of people that came from the one female tended to be, not so good, and the other group tended to be, not involved in bad behavior as much. And suggestion was because of the backgrounds of the women. Eugenic criminology is basically the belief that the root causes of criminality are based upon bad genes. And as I mentioned, the eugenics movement in the 20s and 30s, there were actually states that wanted to limit the reproductive rights of people who might come from these so-called bad families who had bad genes, not let them have any more kids. Supermale, XYY. I say this is the extra Y. This is someone, a male that has an extra Y chromosome. This was discovered in 1965. Characteristics are on the slide. These people are considered potentially violent. Certainly they found a larger percentage of them in prisons and mental hospitals than in the general population, which is suggestive that they may be more violent than other people. Modern day criminal families, been some Dutch research that said male descendants of a criminal family had a high proportion of violent crime arrests. The influence of enzymes within the body, like monoamine oxidase A, have been associated with aggressive behavior. Excessive amounts of MAOA linked to aggression. And notice that at the same time, the increase in MAOA breaks down that serotonin, which I said people needed for more calming effects. If you break that down and it doesn't work, then you're more likely to have problems. Behavioral genetics is basically the study of the environmental contributions to individual variations in human behavior. How does the environment influence genetics? There's also twin studies, and there's a lot more detail in the book than I want to go into right now. But there is, again, some research that supports a relationship between heredity and the risk of criminality. We'll talk about an interesting story with regard to twins separated at birth. A couple studies show twins separated at birth who, even with different parents, still behaved in a similar fashion. So the suggestion there is it was genetically based rather than environmentally based. So that's out there as well. Human Genome Project. As you know, Human Genome Project, we're mapping the human genome and basically finding genes that might cause certain diseases. Well, there's also the potential that if there are some genes that might lead to negative behaviors and we can identify those genes, that maybe we can do something about these problems, just like getting rid of any other disease where the gene might be a factor. Male-female differences, we've already talked about that. We know that men commit far more crimes than females. Women, although they make up 51% of the population, are only arrested for 18% of violent crimes and 31% of property crimes. It's explained by either cultural and social environment. In other words, do we treat our women differently in society? Do we raise them differently and therefore they're not aggressive? Or is there a biological and genetic factor that leads to this? Sociobiology is basically the study of the biological basis of social behavior, 75 to the present. Altruism, tribalism, survival of the gene pool. Basically bringing together biology, behavior, and evolutionary ecology by Edward Wilson in 1975. It's just a new way to look at criminological theories at that time. And in sociobiology, they said the main determinant of behavior is the need to ensure their survival and continuity of genetic material through generations. In other words, as I mentioned earlier, and in a different theory, that in social biology it's believed that our behavior is caused by our need to perpetuate our own genetic material, to allow our line to survive. And there's also the concept of territoriality. My hood, my house, whatever, as a explanation of conflict. And altruism facilitates the continuity of the gene pool. So some criticisms of this theory, sociobiology. It doesn't really consider the significance of the culture and social learning and individual experiences that people might be brought up into. Certainly, depending on where you are in the world, you're brought up totally differently, and there's different beliefs and values. Also suggested it is totally wrong with how it depicts human nature. Rationalizes the labeling and stigmatization of minorities. In other words, if we can start to say that there is a inferior group in society, that we can label and stigmatize them, similar to the eugenics. And also it suggested that a lot of these studies are done on animals, and humans are too different from animals to really be able to draw any inferences from that. Crime and Human Nature. James Wilson and Richard Herrnstein in 1985 basically were starting to revive ideas of biological criminology. And there are people studying it today because it's found that there may be some factors, biological factors, that have a relationship to crime. Some listed here. Gender. We know males commit more crimes than females. Why? Age. We know that younger people commit more crimes than older people. Body type. Violent crimes. Clearly, athletic people commit more violent crimes than out-of-shape people, just because they can. Intelligence might be related to certain types of crimes that people commit. And personality might be related to certain crimes. Somebody who's got a real aggressive personality, as an example, might be more likely to commit crimes than someone with a more laid-back personality. Constitutional factors might predispose one to specific types of behavior, and then how society reacts might determine whether they continue it or not. Later on, when we're into psychology, we'll be talking about labeling theory. which is just like this. Somebody commits a crime, society labels them, and then they continue. But it's crucial that we consider how heredity, biology, and the social environment are involved together in crime causation. Some policy implications. Pinker claims social scientists unjustly ignore biological basis of human behavior, basically suggesting that, the people that have been doing criminology since like the late 70s, early 80s, and it was social problem, social structure, social process, that ignore that there's a biological basis. Pinker also identified 3 myths that are explained in your book. Blank slate, that, suggesting that sociologists suggest that people are a blank slate and it's the environment that creates them. The myth of the noble savage and the ghost in the machine. C. Ray Jeffrey talks about some social policies that we could put in place that might help deal with some of the biological issues, like pre- and postnatal care. You have people growing up in societies where maybe they're not getting proper food, the mother during childbirth not getting proper food, child after birth is not getting proper diet, care, or whatever. If society stepped in and provided pre- and postnatal care, that child might have a better chance. Monitoring children through development, making sure they're getting what they needed, so that some of the biological things that might be based upon diet and other factors, environmental factors that cause biological issues, could be prevented. Neurological examinations, we'll talk more of that in class when we talk about Adrian Rain. We can find out maybe ahead of time about people that are predisposed to crime because of certain types of brain issues or brain damage. And certainly we could learn more by doing biological research in our prisons and treatment facilities. Now, certainly one big concern is the reemergence of eugenics. Remember, eugenics was the 20s and 30s, where if we could identify, say, a line of people who had issues that might be more criminally likely than others, that we would isolate these people from society. There's a great fear of people overusing biological theories and starting to identify and want to isolate people like that. Some critiques of biological theories, that it's conceptually it's inadequate in how it looks at crime. Twin studies suggest that there's misclassifications. You really can't estimate the degree of criminality amongst the sample populations. Methodological problems in the studies. Remember, we talked about research and how important it is to have a good method and research types. Suggestions that some of these biological theories did not really have good methods. And also, remember we talked about external validity. Well, some of the critiques here are that studies that were conducted in places outside of the United States may not really be valid or applicable in this country, that we can't say, hey, well, we did this study in Sweden and we know that this is a problem and we need to bring it to the United States. So that's the end of this lecture on biological theories of crime. While you're pondering what you've just heard, think about the movie we watched also, Trading Places. Trading Places was primarily about biological theories of crime, really, because they talked about heredity and how it's involved in crime. So hopefully you enjoyed this brief lecture. Hopefully I delivered.